Thank you very much, Max, and thank you very much for to Dr. Matthews and all the colleagues on the line today for also having me here today. So my name is James Drummond. I'm in a sister division to Max's. I'm getting some feedback on the line. If someone has their microphone on, can I please ask you to? Thank you very much. So I'm in a sister a directorate to Max, where we focus on better regulatory policy making. And just like Max, I've noted several intersections between our work and what has already been mentioned about the incredibly great work being launched today by Dr. Matthew and his team here. First of all, of course, this movement towards digitalization and what we're calling agile governance is a very big and important movement right now across the OECD and really across the world, and really a focus on how we can use digital tools and better regulatory governance processes to reduce burdens and make better policies, also in support of the SDGs as well. And I'm really struck by some of the comments that have been made already today about inclusion for all, which requires a barrier-free approach. If you have barriers in place, it's really hard to include everybody, and a need to align many different institutions and different policy areas, which requires a coordinated approach. And it's exactly these sort of ideas that we explore in the sort of concept of better regulation. So I'm looking forward today. I have a few slides as well, and happy to take questions at the end as well. But before I get into the nuts and bolts of it, I just want to take one step back and just make the point that regulation is incredibly important to achieving the goals of building entrepreneurship and promoting SME development, because it's one of the three major tools that governments use to achieve their policy agenda, alongside both fiscal spending and taxation as well. And fundamentally, what regulation does is encourage people to start doing something or stop doing something. That's fundamentally what regulation is meant to do. On the start doing something side of things, there's a famous picture some of you might have seen from the Empire State Building being constructed, where you see workers very high up without safety gear on. If one falls, it's probably disaster. And regulation has encouraged people to start adopting things like safety gear to help promote safety at the workplace, which keeps people employed, keeps people in their jobs, keeps jobs moving forward, and it's better for everyone involved. But then we also stop doing something. And here is maybe an overly dramatic photo of pollution coming out of a smokestack. And of course, regulation has encouraged the reduction of those pollutants and helped make a cleaner planet, which will be really important going forward. And the point I'm bringing up this for is to note the human impact of regulation. Regulations fundamentally affect people. And if you make it difficult or hard for people to comply and read, first and foremost, read the regulation, understand the regulation, but then comply with the regulation, it just will not achieve its outcome of getting people to start or stop doing something. And this is where we have this framework called better regulation or good regulatory governance, where we look at the entire system of policymaking and look at ways in which reforms can be added to help make better policy. Here involves a strategic approach that involves actually making high-level commitments to better regulation, identifying reforms for all the various institutions that are involved in regulatory policymaking, using tools that generate and use evidence to make better policy, and then thinking about how all these elements come together. And when the system works well, it uses evidence-based policies or generates evidence-based policies that have the dual impact of protecting society and the environment, while also promoting the function of good markets, such as building entrepreneurship. And today, you'll see my presentation mostly focus on elements of the regulatory management tool space, but happy to comment on it more broadly. And just as a bit of a setting the baseline, where this information comes from is the OECD policy standards. We have passed 4 recommendations on better regulation, which is the soft law of the OECD. It's what members agree on should be the rules that we all abide by. And those are quite legal and quite high level, and they're implemented by the OECD best practice principles. You see 8 of them there that we have developed over the course of the last about decade or so. And these have been developed through our OECD committees and networks. The highest level is the OECD Regulatory Policy Committee, which is our governing body of all better regulation officials from across the OECD and partner countries. But then we have networks like the Network of Economic Regulators and the ASEAN OECD Good Regulatory Practices Network, where this is dived deeper into at sort of a policy or regional level. And I'm highlighting ASEAN similarly, both because they are the neighbors to you guys, and there's lots of good work being done there. But the majority of the work is focused on SMEs and promoting a more SME-friendly environment. And you see that as a theme through all the publications I note on the right. So in the last few minutes of my presentation, I just want to bring up some of these sort of key lessons learned as some ideas for helping you as you seek to build entrepreneurship in SMEs. The first comes from a publication we wrote directly on the use of better regulation, also called Good Regulatory Practices for SMEs in Southeast Asia. And some of the key lessons that come out of that is first to recognize that there is not one singular type of entrepreneur or SME. There's many different types. Some want to stay local and just have a thriving business at the local level. Some want access to global value chains, and many in between. And that we need to be thinking about these different types of groups and different types of people as we're developing policies. And as well, remembering that compared to large corporations, SMEs can struggle with regulatory compliance. First of all, understanding very complex regulations, but also how they frequently change. Large corporations can employ teams of very highly educated lawyers that are dedicated to regulatory compliance. SMEs fundamentally cannot do that. And so understanding and adjusting is quite difficult to them. And overly burdensome regulatory requirements are a factor that limits the growth of SMEs from informal to formal businesses, which I'll pick up again in my next slide. And the fundamental conclusion is that we need a better regulation approach to SMEs that focuses on developing a fair, transparent, clear, and effective environment that is dedicated to these different needs of SMEs where we can. And picking up that transition from formality to informality, informality to formality, excuse me, that was written on in 2017 as well with business registration principles for the ASEAN region. And this was fundamentally written from the perspective of governments want to and should be encouraging businesses to become formalized. This both provides obviously a revenue base for governments because they enter the taxation system, but also provides a number of benefits. Governments can provide more strategic and targeted policies when they know these SMEs exist, as well as can provide them legal protections. They're no longer at risk of criminal penalties or liabilities. And it gives them access to things that help them grow, such as bank credit or government support that often need formality to be able to access. And the fundamental argument of that paper is that compared to, when firms want to make that decision to go from informal to formal, they fundamentally compare the cost of doing so. They compare the cost of the burden of registration with the ongoing compliance costs, taxes, licensing, labor laws, et cetera, and what benefits they'll receive out of it. And if that calculation is too costly, they're just not going to invest in becoming formal. And it creates, again, this sort of barrier to becoming. And that paper goes through a number of different pillars and ways forward that governments can use to make more business-friendly registration principles that is very fundamental to growing SMEs and entrepreneurship. And as my very last point in my about 10 minutes or so that we have to discuss, I just wanted to note a tool that literally came out today. This was released today. So you see on the screen there the best practice principles on regulatory impact assessment. It's one of the 8 that I noted in an earlier slide. And what regulatory impact assessment, or RIA, is a way, before you design and create a policy, a way to think through the different options for regulating and find the one that has the highest benefits for the least cost. Because at the end of the day, that's what you want to be doing, is find the most beneficial policy that has the least burden for people. That was a general document, but we released today the annex. So we were developing multiple annexes to this. And one annex that was released today was an SME test, an actual test for taking SMEs and entrepreneurships into account when conducting a RIA. It's quite a long document, so I can't obviously present on the entire thing today, but I will note that it has the 4 stages for establishing, designing, implementing, and using the results of this test to be able to, before you make policy decisions, think about SMEs and entrepreneurs before you make decisions. And the link is there on the slide. That's it for me. If you want more information, there's the general link to the regulatory policy work. And of course, please do get in touch.